Welcome, everybody, to Misguided the Podcast, where we explore the psychology of how we process information and how we can become better thinkers in our noisy digital world. I'm your host, Matthew Facciani. My guest today is Dr. Andy Norman, a philosopher who has spent decades studying how ideas take hold in our minds and societies. His work focuses on cognitive immunology, which is the science of how our minds defend themselves against bad ideas. We talk about what it means to build mental immunity, why some ideas spread like viruses, and how educators and citizens alike can strengthen their cognitive defenses. Andy also shares powerful stories from the classroom, his work with the Mental Immunity Project, and a hopeful vision for creating communities of inquiry that value truth over tribalism. If you've ever wondered how to inoculate your mind against misinformation, or why learning to ignore critically is just as important to think critically, this conversation is for you. And if you like what you hear, hit subscribe and share the episode with a friend. It really helps more people find the show and join the conversation. Let's get into it. Andy, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk with you and get into all the things you've been doing. And I was curious, before we jump into some of the projects you're doing now, I was curious if you could share with my listeners more about your journey, because my understanding is you started in philosophy and then you've been working more on this media literacy, mental immunity projects. How did that all come to be? How did you jump from philosophy to this media literacy pre-bunking type of scenario?
Yeah, so philosophy is my home discipline. That's what I taught at the university level for about 25 years. And going all the way back to 1994, I was just out of grad school and I was wrestling with some really thorny questions on sort of the role of reasoning and construction and maintenance of our knowledge. And I came across this it was a somewhat inflammatory article titled "Viruses of the Mind" by Richard Dawkins, and it was in a book I was asked to review for a journal. And in that article, Dawkins makes reference to, he compares the gullibility of young children who will believe you if you tell them the tooth fairy exists, for example. He says that they're almost like immune-compromised adults. And his point was just basically that, until we learn something like critical thinking, we're highly susceptible to false and misleading information, and that we actually have to develop our immunity to those things. Now, a lot of work in both epistemology, the branch of philosophy that I play in, and on critical thinking centers on the idea that if it just imparts certain skills, we can become far less susceptible to being misled. I think that's true, but I think there's much more going on than just skills. I think there are habits of mind and dispositions, and like whether or not you're curious, whether or not you are reactive to challenges, whether or not you have certain tribal affiliations, all of those things end up influencing the degree to which we're either susceptible or immune to, say, a false narrative or a conspiracy theory. So Dawkins calls for a discipline of information epidemiology, way back building on his concept of memes. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, that's a good idea, but shouldn't there be a corresponding discipline of cognitive immunology? And ever since then, so for about 30 years, I've been trying to sort of interpreting the core questions in philosophy, or epistemology more precisely, through the lens of immunology, and realizing that the discoveries of immunologists and the concepts wielded by immunologists are actually enormously clarifying, and that they can help us not just answer deep, esoteric philosophical questions, but also help us just become better critical thinkers. Yeah,
absolutely. That's interesting how you got into it before it's been popularized in the last 10 years even, with a lot of the pre-bunking work. And I'm curious, one, like how you've seen that space evolve over the years, but also if you could just share this term mental immunity. Is it more than just a metaphor? Like how do you understand that term for our minds? Like what does that help researchers and practitioners do when they understand mental immunity?
So you might think that the concept of immunity, that its home discipline is biology or epidemiology. Turns out, no. Biologists borrowed the term from the legal profession. So susceptibility and immunity to certain legal provisions was in use long before microbiology was even a thing. Microbiologists picked up and repurposed a term from the law. And now the terms susceptibility and immunity are kind of two sides of the same coin. If you're more susceptible, you're less immune. And if you're less susceptible, and if you're more immune, you're less susceptible. And it turns out that those concepts have been evolving beyond the boundaries of any one discipline for a long, long time. So we talk about immunity to persuade or susceptibility to persuasion, right? We can talk about immunity to conspiracy theorizing. These terms have long since jumped the boundaries of one discipline and become general purpose or more abstract concepts that are tied to sort of broad patterns that extend across domains. So you could say that talk of mental immunity is metaphorical, and to some degree it is, but you have to remember that language is always evolving, and the line between literal and metaphorical is itself not a hard and fast line. Think of the term foothills. At one point, the hills near higher mountains were creatively called foothills because they sat at the foot of those mountains. That was a metaphorical usage when it first came out, but when it became normalized, it started to look and feel literal. The concept of memes has gone through the exact same process just in the last 50 years about. Remember how everybody used to use the word memes and scare quotes for a while because nobody was quite sure if it was literal? Now we're quite confident that memes are real things, and we just drop the scare quotes and get on with the task of using this useful concept. I think the same thing's going to happen to concepts of mental immunity, mental susceptibility, mind inoculation, cognitive antibodies. All of these concepts are coming into use and proving to be useful for both researchers and people who are interested in better instructional design for critical thinkers.
Yeah, it certainly provides structure and language and an opportunity for theory building in this area. I think a lot about, or I have thought a lot about theory construction and the philosophy of science and how that can connect to both social science, but then also as I went more into media literacy, I thought about the education side of it and how you can build these educational tools from a framework that allows for this like cumulative knowledge process to begin.
That's right.
Yeah, so
that's my vision for.
Yeah.
So I gave the field of cognitive immunology its name, and have hopes that it will become, first of all, a field that grows and develops as more people enter into it from bringing different disciplinary specialties. I think we need epidemiologists, media literacy folks, we need psychologists, we need philosophers. And where all of those disciplines overlap, there's a need for specialized understanding of how sketchy ideas spread and what we have to do to prevent them from spreading and corrupting our minds.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was curious if you just unpack that a little bit more. Like, what is a sketchy idea? How does that differ from a non-sketchy idea?
I wish I had so I think if you're looking for an official definition, I may end up disappointing you. But look, we're all tempted to call some ideas good and some ideas bad, even if we have a less than precise understanding of where the boundaries between those two concepts meet. I think here's my more detailed philosophical answers. Ideas have many, many properties. They have relationships to evidence, and you might call those epistemic properties. If an idea's relationship to the evidence is strong, that's a good thing. So being well evidenced is a good making property of an idea. Everybody pretty much acknowledges that. But ideas can also have implications for our beliefs and our behaviors, and they can cause us to do good things or bad things. So ideas have both upstream relationships to evidence and downstream relationships to behavior. Both matter, and sometimes the downstream effects of an idea are awful enough to merit calling the idea bad. Think about the concept of calling people you don't like vermin. All of us know, independent of without even having to look at the evidence, that's a bad idea, right? It's a bad idea because it causes people to dehumanize one another and mistreat one another. We know where that language takes people, and it's not a good place. So I think we need to be candid about the fact that each idea can be evaluated on several different dimensions: fit with evidence, truth or falsehood, whether it's conducive to happiness, whether it's conducive to social harmony, or the opposites. And it's permissible to look at all of those different qualities of an idea and kind of sum up the goodness and the badness and come up with an overall goodness or badness rating. This isn't rocket science. It's something we all do kind of by the seat of our pants every day, unless we get allergic to the whole idea of calling ideas good and bad. So many people worry that if you talk frankly about good and bad ideas, that you're going to start, become the thought police and instantly start forcing your good ideas onto people. That's not the idea. The idea is that we all need to work together to decide where the boundary between good ideas and bad ideas is. What we can't do is just turn a blind eye and say, well, who's to say? And pretend that the idea will resolve itself, because it won't. We have to use our best judgment and our best techniques for determining which ideas are true and which ideas are beneficial.
Yeah, I really like how you phrase that there, especially at the end, because there's this broader discussion of fact-checking and studying information, misinformation, as this creep on or attack on free speech, and sometimes it gets conflated. But from my understanding of your work and my understanding of my own work, what we focus on is teaching skills on how to navigate the information environment. It's not about saying, okay, this is wrong, and like you're starting with like this single topic saying, if you believe that, you're wrong, and then like diving into the specifics. It's more about, here are the properties that can determine if something, as you say, is a good idea or a bad idea, or if there's certain manipulation techniques to look out for. Or for me, I think a lot about understanding our own psychological biases and how that can influence information processing, yes, rather than focusing on the specifics of the content of the question being discussed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so often you can judge an idea sketchy based on the methods that were used to arrive at it. Mm-hmm. So quite apart from, there's a process called technique-based psychological inoculation. So the idea here is that, you can look at the particular claim that somebody might have a tendency to believe, and you can try to show that it doesn't fit with evidence and thereby inoculate people against believing it. But it's really hard to run around and playing whack-a-mole with every false or sketchy idea that comes along. So the idea is you want to try to inoculate against broad classes of information that have certain properties in common. So think about the category of conspiracy theories. There's a whole bunch of hazardous belief traps there, or potentially hazardous belief traps that all work more or less the same way. And if you can teach kids, say, how they work and what it's like to start falling down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole, and how to say, wait a minute here, this might not be a good idea.
Yeah, so I guess as we're talking about these different strategies to improve cognitive and mental immunity, I'm curious if you could speak more about the projects that you've been working on. Like, how do we actually teach these at scale, and like specifically in the individual level, but also other ways that can improve this to increase the scale for communities or online spaces and stuff like that?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start with a story and then bring me back to the question of how this might apply going forward. So shortly after I read that article by Richard Dawkins called Viruses of the Mind, I was kind of smitten by this idea that sketchy information can spread in viral fashion and infect our minds. So I took this idea into a university classroom where I was teaching critical thinking. The students had, to that point in the semester, been kind of listless and less than optimally engaged. And I said, hang on, guys, set aside the homework, and I want you to answer this question for me. Can a mind become infected? And they said, well, what do you mean, Professor Norman? You mean a brain? I was like, no, I actually mean a mind. And they said, infected with what? And I said, well with bad ideas. And they kind of looked different. I said, all right, we'll break into groups and discuss it and come back with your answer. And 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, they came back and said, yeah, we kind of think that idea makes sense. And then somebody says, well, how do you cure a mind infection? And somebody else pipes up and says, by getting rid of the belief. And somebody else says, wait a minute, is that what this critical thinking is about? Is about helping us become immune to belief, to mind infections? It's like, bingo, that's it. That's what this class is all about. And it was fascinating because that entire group of students became so energized to try to figure out how to, the key question I asked them at one point was, so is it other people's minds that get infected or your own? And they all kind of went like, whoa. They realized that, you know what? We all have minds that are filled with ideas that are there for problematic or questionable reasons. And so we all need to get better at, first of all, at being humble epistemically humble and willing to rethink things. But we also need to get good at what I call mind debugging. And I actually think that the framing, so mind debugging probably sounds like critical thinking, kind of is, or it's part of critical thinking anyway. But it's a way of describing it that really has the power to motivate people to learn and master critical thinking. I mean, think about it. We're all highly motivated to wash our hands after we go to the bathroom because we don't want little bugs crawling around inside our bodies making us sick. Ew, ick, right? Well, try on the concept of mind bugs or mind germs for size and ask yourself, how motivated are you to keep your mind germ-free? And what are you willing to do for it? I suspect that we imagine a future where we use this language, to motivate people to become much better critical thinkers than is the norm today. We live in a world right now where critical thinking doesn't even seem to be close to normal enough to equip us for the digital age. But what if we rethink how we frame and teach and support and develop critical thinking skills in such a way that we're all highly motivated to keep mind germs from making our minds essentially sick? There are belief states out there that make people worse off. There are belief states out there that fracture communities. There are belief states out there that rupture nations and bring down civilizations. These ideas have every right to be thought of. I think we have every right to think of these ideas as dangerous, even if frank talk of dangerous ideas feels uncomfortably close to censorship.
Yeah, it seems like you're focusing again on the properties of these ideas that can contribute to harm both at the individual level or societal level. And the challenge that I always think is like, okay, well, how do you get people to see that? Like they might want to have that belief to them might feel good. Like let's say we have this really extreme belief that's really angry at a group of people.
Yes.
We might agree that that's a harmful belief for society. But to them, individually, it feels good. It's a short-term solution. So they say, hey, I don't have mind bugs. This actually makes me feel good. So how do you grapple with that?
Yeah, so one of the things, I think one of the big lessons of the scientific revolution is that we shouldn't settle for beliefs that feel good, beliefs that are useful or convenient or personally enriching, that it matters. In fact, actually, this is a lesson of the entire philosophical tradition going back to ancient Greece. When we test ideas for truth and refuse to accept them because they're not true, that has an inoculating effect on our entire mindset. So when you think about our cognitive equipment from an evolutionary point of view, it's pretty clear that our minds were probably designed to take on useful beliefs and to screen out beliefs that reduce our biological fitness, right? That's the way evolution should work. And it means that our cognitive equipment is kind of tuned to an idea's usefulness. What we've learned in the last 2,000 years, or at least I hope we'll learn to extract this lesson from 2,000 years of philosophy and science, is that when we retune the mind's immune system to filter out falsehoods and evidentially sketchy things, that our thinking gets better. It gets better aligned with the reality, and it becomes easier to resolve differences between people as well and reach useful consensus on things. So if you can trade in a preference for useful or comforting or self-aggrandizing ideas for ideas that are true and well evidenced, you become a better thinker and a better citizen, or so I argue.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. So I guess it's a matter of the practicality of how do we implement this. And I'm curious, what sorts of techniques have you tried? I know you've done some outreach. I saw you were even on the Joe Rogan Experience. So you've reached some really broad audiences. Have you found you've been able to communicate these ideas with those broad audiences, or have there been any challenges that have popped up for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people get nervous when I talk about bad ideas. I think everybody understands that accusing somebody else of harboring bad ideas can create a tense and conflicted situation. And one thing I learned teaching is that you can't just run around telling people they're wrong and right. telling them this is what you should be believing, right? The whole game is if you really want to teach people and help them understand, you don't tell them what to believe. You show them why something is worth believing. You let them see for themselves and make up their own minds. So I like to think that I don't have an authoritarian bone in my body. I don't want to run around being a thought policeman. But I'm really passionate about how much good can come out of communities of inquiry that share a passion for truth and understanding and are willing to listen to one another's objections to try to sort things out. I've had the chance to create such communities in my classrooms over many years in higher education and even working with younger kids. And it's so uplifting when kids get infected with the spirit of critical inquiry and want to and start testing each other's ideas, not in an antagonistic way, but in a collaborative way. I hear what you're saying, Joe, but it seems to me that you might have overlooked this. Good point, Susie. I guess I ought to shift my credences there a little bit. But as I see it, this is also important, right? So what happens when you create the right learning environment is that everybody feels empowered to help build a shared understanding of the truth, rather than squabble over whose version of the truth is right or whose tribe is on the side of the angels.
Right.
There's a future world out there where we dialogue and converse and swap evidence and ethical considerations to sort these things out, rather than demonize one another. And that's part of what I mean by a community of inquiry. In my book, I talk about the way of inquiry, and I try to sort of lay out what the way of inquiry requires of us. And one of the things it requires of us is to sort of hold our beliefs loosely. Mm-hmm. I argue that we should treat our beliefs as house guests that might wear out their welcome at some point, rather than, antique furniture that you have to hold on to forever and ever and ever. So that's kind of one of the rules of thumb that I think drops out neatly from the cognitive immunology research. Here's another one. Listen to your doubts. There's a little voice when an idea is not quite right, or a statement isn't quite right, there's often a little voice in the back of your head that goes, I'm not so sure about that. If you learn to listen to that voice and give it voice, articulate it in the form of a question, what you're essentially doing is you're strengthening your mind's immune system. You're becoming better at manufacturing cognitive antibodies. Doubts are the antibodies of the mind. And we need to learn not to fear doubts, but embrace them as friendly tools for sorting out truth from falsehood.
Yeah, absolutely. I just I think about the incentive structure and how that doesn't always align in our current social media environment to be like that. And I've also seen like spaces of that kind of collective inquiry, which is really great. It's like, how do we get that at scale when there's so many incentives to avoid that kind of space? I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Such a good question, and I don't have any simple answers. I do think that the insights of this science of cognitive immunology can help us design better social media platforms, for example, platforms that are more conducive to constructive engagement and dialogue rather than flaming and trolling. I don't think an unlimited reach on social media is a right. I think it's a privilege. And as long as we think of the ability to pipe nonsense into thousands of people's minds at the touch of a finger on your smartphone, if we continue to think of that as an absolute right and allow people who abuse that privilege to continue infecting minds at scale, we're going to struggle to create a harmonious society where we thrive. So I think we need Renee DiResta, the former head of the Stanford Internet Observatory, makes a distinction in her new book between speech and reach. Yes, we each have a right to speak, and we should be really careful not to infringe on that right. But does a right to speak mean that you have a right to a bullhorn where 100 million people hear your rants? That's not so clear.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point. Yeah, Renee makes a lot of really great points. I really like her work. And it also makes me think about so that's like more on the broader structural side of how these technology companies are operated. But I also think as we try to work towards that, I've been thinking, like, how do I sell the idea of critical thinking to someone? And I'm curious on your thoughts on this too, because it's like a lot of times I'll get, like, I just started doing this online course on my Substack, and it was really cool. It was great. And I'm curious, like, how can I get people to sign up for that course who aren't already interested in critical thinking? And some of the ways I've been just thinking about this is like, okay, like, what's a big advantage of critical thinking that you immediately can see? And for one thing that I think about is you gain back time, and like you're not being sucked into this outrage machine where there are people literally that's their job is to get you on there, take your time, take your attention, and you will end up feeling worse. So trying to sell that idea, and like I'm just curious if you have thoughts about that and other approaches that kind of resonate.
Yes, and I think your most recent Substack on critical ignoring
Yeah.
speaks to this really well. So critical thinking often involves looking at something even more intently and trying to figure out if it really makes sense. But knowing when something doesn't deserve your attention at all and averting your attention from it and simply refusing to waste your attention on it, that's a critical part of cognitive health, of mental immune health, as I call it. So critical ignoring lateral reading, I think you flagged that as another really powerful tool
Yeah.
in media literacy. Absolutely. I think so. You had Melanie Tressa King, my colleague at Cersei, on your show a little while back.
Yeah.
Her website is called Thinking is Power.
Mm-hmm.
That, in a nutshell, is one way to sell critical thinking. You gain power by learning critical thinking. Here's another way you might sell interest or bring people to your Substack course. I think everybody has a sense now that there are powerful forces out there that are misleading us and manipulating our emotions. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but there's a lot of that going on.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't completely wrong. So one question, we all want deeply to be autonomous, to be self-determining, to decide for ourselves what our lives are going to be like. But what if you spend the first 20 years of your life in online rabbit holes and you end up so influenced by conspiracy thinkers and cult leaders that the rest of your life is a mess? Are you really free? I don't think so. But what is it really, if our minds are full of ideas that got there by accident or got there under dubious pretenses, and I think all of us do, to what extent are we truly free? And don't you have to debug your mind in order to become, or use the term critical thinking if you prefer? You have to learn critical thinking, free yourself of the influence of bad ideas that happen to be lurking in your own belief system. That's a way to become a much more autonomous version of yourself. But it requires that you look inward for flaws, not just point fingers at others and blame them.
Yeah. So not only is thinking power, but thinking is freedom. That could be another.
There we go. There we go. Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really like that framing, and I think it does resonate with folks. And I do think most people have a general understanding that there are, especially when you go on social media, you know that it's trying to manipulate you. Like, you have an idea that there's some pull there, even if you don't have the language for understanding like algorithms and stuff like that. I think people generally know the most sensationalist stuff gets thrown at you. So again, it's like, I think about how do we add more friction to that initial step of like, you pull out your phone, you're seeing all this stuff designed to pull you in. How do we even have that first step of like, oh, like maybe I can put my phone down and think about this more just for an extra second? And yeah, I think that's like a big challenge.
Yeah, wonderful question. Melanie and I give workshops to both teachers and high school kids on this sort of thing. One of the things we urge kids to think about, first of all, we test them beforehand and ask them questions about their general attitude towards the information out there. It turns out most students are pretty naive about the amount of sketchy and outright manipulative information out there. So you give them a few facts about how many different ways people try to influence you, try to trigger your emotions to get you to vote a certain way, or how many times people try to appeal to your weakest, your basest desires to get you to reach into your wallet and spend money. There's a whole lot of that out there. And you can help kids realize that there are a lot of people out there who have agendas, and they're using the stuff they put on the internet to try to influence you. So what do you do in a world like that? Do you instantly become cynical and just say everybody's corrupt, you can't trust anybody? No, that's not the answer. Indiscriminate skepticism or cynicism is a trap, just as indiscriminate trust is. But we can all become more discriminating. And I think the best critical thinkers, the best thinkers in our world, have a pretty well-calibrated sense of when language is being used to manipulate them rather than help them, manipulate them rather than educate them, for example. But not everybody has had the benefits of an education that do that for them. I think we should be redesigning education and including media literacy to give people a very delicate sense of, I think we all need to ask who's saying this? Why? Who posted this?
Right.
Why? And if before we believe or rely on that information in any way or share it with others, we need to ask ourselves if it's really, if they aren't mind germs in disguise. Or bad mind germs disguised as good mind germs.
So those workshops that you've done with Melanie, those sound really interesting. And I'm curious if you could share any specifics of like certain techniques that have resonated more with students, and what would you like to see implemented if you could wave a magic wand and have it implemented in classrooms?
Yeah, so Melanie's really good at this. One of the things she does is she has kids come up with their own spoof conspiracy theories
Oh, yeah.
or their own sketchy advertising campaigns for a pseudoscientific health product. So you teach kids a little bit about how conspiracy theories work, and then you say, all right, go nuts. Come up with a conspiracy. Who came up, is conspiring to do what to us, how, and what's their story? And kids go off into groups and they come up with their own wacky conspiracy theory and they make it fun and goofy, and then they present them to each other and there's lots of laughter. But by building these goofy theories themselves, they start to see how they work and they become better at spotting them later. And then the real kicker is you get them into groups. You have the groups get together, and the defender of a conspiracy theory, their job is to reject anything that might disprove their conspiracy theory. So their job is to warp the evidence in any way they have to maintain that conspiratorial belief. And once they understand that you can rationalize just about anything, kids start to wondering, how much of the reasoning going on around me is really rationalized? Geez, I better pay closer attention, because reasons and rationalizations are different things. And if I don't get good at spotting the difference, people are playing me. So as Melanie likes to say, so I think we have to bring bad information into classrooms. It's a really bad idea to expose kids only to good information for the first 20 years of their lives and then turn them loose into a world awash in bad information. Kids have to play with it. They have to work with it. They have to try to learn how to sort out the good from the bad. These should be part of every single classroom activity from kindergarten on. And this is what countries like Iceland are already doing.
Right.
And they're doing it so well that their kids are much better critical thinkers and much less susceptible to Russian disinformation than our own children are.
Yeah.
It can be done. We just have to get busy and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the encouraging thing, that there is examples of this in other countries and throughout the world. It's not some insurmountable task. So, yeah.
It can feel, there are days when it feels hopeless to me too.
Sure.
But you're right. We can't succumb to despair. Sometimes these things change pretty rapidly as awareness grows. I mean, I think in some ways the mental immunity frame, the mind bugs frame that I'm pushing, can kind of induce a paradigm shift, a new way of looking at information and a new way of relating to information. I think it's probably going to take something pretty fundamental like that for us to really turn our culture around. And that's why I'm pushing this different lens for viewing these things, because I think it might just hold the power to fundamentally rebalance an equation that's right now deeply out of balance.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious on your current and future projects. Like, what are you hoping to do next as we navigate this current political landscape, information landscape, AI landscape? What projects are you interested in right now and in the future?
I'll mention a couple of research projects. Sander van der Linden at Cambridge, and I recently published a paper with a colleague asking, do minds really have immune systems of their own? And it turns out you can return a surprisingly definite, assuming you define immune system properly, the answer is yes, minds really do have immune systems of their own, given this definition. And that it turns out to be really useful to think, to analyze our own brains functioning that way. But more recently, I'm working on the idea that germ theory is one of the has done more to benefit humanity than almost any other scientific idea in the history of. But if you really understand germ theory, you see that it applies to infectious things of all kinds, not just infectious microbes. So what if we took the insights of germ theory and applied them to infectious information and developed germ theoretic strategies for combating viral disinformation, say, viral propaganda? I think we're going to need something like that, because we've created a world where sketchy information can go viral and harm all of us. One of our collaborators, a historian from Holland, he studied the outbreak of witchcraft beliefs back in the early modern period. And he's argued very persuasively that witchcraft beliefs are essentially mind parasites that harmed everybody they came into contact with. if he's right about that, if parasitic information is a real thing, and I think it is a real thing, then it's time we stopped pretending otherwise. It's time we started addressing cognitive contagion for the threat that it is, especially now that we've built a world where cognitive contagion can spread so rapidly. I know it makes people uncomfortable to think of their own minds as infected. I know it makes people uncomfortable they worry that the concept of mind germs or mind viruses will be used to just point fingers and blame other people. Think about the way Elon Musk talks about the woke mind virus, right? I mean, that's just a weaponization of a concept that should be treated in an even-handed, fair-minded way. So, long story short, I think cognitive germ theory, as I'm calling it, has a role to play in helping us tame this new informational Wild West we've created.
And it's important to be mindful of the mind viruses infecting the concept of mind viruses.
Yes, that's right.
So if people want to find your work online today, where can they find you?
I'm going to send you some links.
Yeah.
I hope you can put it
Absolutely.
in the show notes, Matthew. I have a website, andynorman.org. You'll find it, Andy Norman. But the institute I run, where we are trying to leverage this science of mental immunity into the mainstream. It's called the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative. So cognitivimmunology.net. CIRCE is the acronym for short. You can find my stuff there. And then I've worked closely with Melanie on what we call the Mental Immunity Project. And there are lots of fun, colorful learning tools there for helping kids and grown-ups become more mind germ aware and helping to level up their thinking skills.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll definitely include all those links in the show notes. Absolutely. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
My pleasure, Matthew. It's been great, and I love the work you're doing, and I hope you'll keep it up.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.